Hey, Mohammed.
Hey, Frank.
How you doing?
I'm doing good.
That's great. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Leadership in a Crisis. We're going to wait for just a few minutes, as we typically do in webinar experiences, to let people check in, actually join into this Just Ask tool, and give everybody just a few moments to make sure that things are moving. And I know that, well, if you haven't pressed the play button, you would be able to see me say that, so I probably won't say that. But we want to make sure that everybody is able to join before we kick off. So maybe in about a minute or so. Does that sound all right, Mohammed?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Let's do it.
Let's just awkwardly sit here.
How's your day going so far, Frank?
It's going good.
Yeah.
I got you that coffee.
Yes.
Very good
so
coffee.
Glad. My wife is going to be really excited.
It's great. They just roasted it like 2 days ago, or 1 day ago. So you got some good stuff, man.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. I think we're good. I think we've got enough folks that have joined in. I think we can get started. So everybody, welcome to this webinar event. Today, we're going to be discussing leadership in a crisis. So I want to make some brief introductions. First, my name is Frank. I'm a director here at Softway. And this, to my right, this gentleman here is Mohammed Anwar. And Mohammed, you are the CEO of Softway.
Yes, I certainly am.
I am? That's great. So before we talk about leadership in a crisis, because we want to get right to it. There's actually a lot to cover in this conversation today. Before we get there, I want to set some ground rules. So we're going to be having a conversation, Mohammed, just you and me, and walking through this story of how to build empathy and empathetic leadership. But I also want to talk about what's going to happen about 30 to 40 minutes into this discussion. Everyone who's watching right now, you are in a tool that we created at Softway called Just Ask. And this tool is actually free for you to use as well. If you find value in it and you want to use it for meetings or conversations, you can use this as a free tool for your own company or a situation that you're hosting. But you can actually ask questions in the Just Ask tool. You can ask them anonymously, or you can ask them with your full name. Doesn't really matter for us. But we want you to be able to ask those questions, and you can start asking questions immediately. Now, 30 to 40 minutes in is when we're going to jump over and actually pull those questions in and start having a discussion about them, because we may end up answering some of those questions during our conversation. But that's why you're using this tool today. That's what we wanted to just call out, so you can begin to do that now. So before we get started around leadership in a crisis, it's important to discuss who we are at Softway, how we operate, and what we believe, because that kind of sets the stage. So Softway is a company that aims to humanize technology, propel brands, and change culture. And it's interesting that when we talk about being a digital transformation agency, we talk a lot about culture and how culture factors into everything we do. And really, what underpins all of that is love. So Softway has this culture of love that we believe love can be a business strategy and maybe even should be a business strategy. So we've emulated that as an organization, that love is a business strategy. And the approach that we take with everything we do is to bring humanity back to the workplace through humanizing technology, through propelling brands in a human way, and through changing culture. And at Softway, we have done a tremendous amount of work in the culture space, specifically around leadership. So even just last year, we hosted events around the world called Seneca Leaders. And we took over 1,000 leaders and executives through this training and experience around leadership development. So today we're going to be specifically talking about the role of culture, the role of love, and the role of servant leadership as it pertains to how to lead in a crisis. And again, I just want to set the stage so you understand where we're coming from and why we're talking about certain things like love, culture, servant leadership, etc. So with that being said, Mohammed, I want to jump in and talk about what happened in March.
Yes.
Because what hit us in March of this year hit everyone else. It was an external factor that created this crisis, right? Like we can create our own crises internally whenever we want to, but this was an external factor that affected the globe. So March 2020, this pandemic hits and it changes everything for us. One of the most drastic things that happened for our organization was that clients began to pause work and our revenue was driven to near standstill, which was a red alert moment for us because our client work dries up. They say pause, or hey, we're moving out, and we have to make very drastic, very crisis-driven decisions in that moment to survive as an organization. So with that happening, we made this excruciatingly painful decision to furlough 60% of our US office in order to save the business, in order to make sure that we could do what we needed to do to survive. At the same time, we completely changed our business strategy. So we've furloughed 60% of our US team. We completely pivoted our business strategy as an organization, including our entire team structure, all while shifting to completely remote operations. So if you want to talk about crisis on crisis on crisis, this is it, right? It's next gen crisis. We're talking about changing our business structure, having a reduced workforce that's currently working, while also remotely engaging as an organization. And being an international team, we have an office in India as well, here in Houston, Texas. So we've worked together in that capacity, but not like this, never like this.
Yep.
And then we experienced this massive internal culture change of bringing back teams from furlough. So that's where I want to pick the story up. So just to kind of set the stage for everyone, March hits, client work dries up. We had to furlough 60% of our US team. Internal culture changes because we've completely retooled our business strategy and our entire team structure, our entire remote workforce operations. It sounds like I'm getting anxious just saying this, Mohammed. This is I'm stressing out. So I want to pick the story up where we brought this group of people back from furlough after a total of about 6 weeks. This entire group was brought back on board. So I want to ask you this question. What did you notice about how leaders were acting or treating people when furloughed folks came back? What are some of maybe the trends that you saw emerging when that group of people was met with folks that came back from furlough?
Sure. So it was obviously very difficult, right? Because the folks that had a chance to stay back during the furlough period, which was about 6 weeks, and there was about 50 to 60% of our staff that wasn't with us. We weren't allowed to work with them or have interactions with them for a period of 6 weeks. And
that was legal. Legally,
yes,
we weren't allowed to. Right?
Yes, that is correct. We weren't allowed to talk about work or do anything to do with work during this period of 6 weeks. So when our team started to come back, the folks, we call them the skeletal crew that stayed back during those 6 weeks. And when the rest of the team was coming back, it was all of a sudden a new dynamic, which we had never experienced. It was like us versus them kind of a mindset. But at the same time, us as a skeletal crew, we had this feeling of guilt and like feeling like we felt sorry for the team for having to gone on a furlough and having to go through what they went through. Obviously we were sad, and we were having these mixed emotions when our team came back, to a point where when time came to talk about work or doing something, we were overly cautious of what kind of work we were giving or how to hold our team accountable, because we were feeling so bad and sorry for the team that we weren't able to tell our team that they needed to focus on the outcomes or do certain things that were necessary for the work. It became very difficult to have those conversations because of the situation we had just come from.
Yeah. And I mean, I can think back too of when folks came back on board. I had a really hard time connecting with people because I didn't really know what to talk about. Because I felt basically trapped by not having that shared life experience. And I was very unsure about how to ask someone to do something because I hadn't fully understood what they had gone through, the mental gymnastics of coming back to work after this, inside of a global pandemic, inside of a completely retooled company, remote environment, all of that. And so when many people would come to me and ask me for help or tell me about their situations that they were going through, I would be paralyzed.
Right.
I wouldn't go the extra step. I would just listen and say, I'm really sorry about that.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. There are many instances, examples like that happened where if there was something important for the company, we needed to review or read or do. With the staff, we were more open to say, hey, you know what, do it if you can. We understand if you don't do it. And, ultimately, we were unable to uh, balance between compassion and getting the work done.
That makes sense. Do you have any other specific examples that kind of point out to you that you can kind of use as like this is a very tangible thing that I experienced?
Yeah, so I think part of the thing is we tried to understand where the team may have been coming from, having been on a furlough for 6 weeks, maybe how this remote environment with the pandemic, not having a job, not having a salary, and how they've had to have to cope up with it, how it may have messed up their schedules, sleeping cycles, all of that type of stuff. And what I saw happen was we were trying to understand their situation so much so that we were just feeling sorry for them or bad for them or feeling sad, and we're afraid to tell them, okay, but now you need to do work.
Yeah.
And we weren't able to get our team to do certain basic training or review certain documents or hold them accountable to do those things because we were just so feeling sorry for them for what they had gone through.
Right.
And so we started to go into this path of sympathy, and we were sympathizing with them, and that sympathy wasn't allowing us to get work done. It was coming in the way of getting work done.
Right. And I want to ask, like, that style of leadership, which you're saying is like a sympathetic style of leadership. Do you think that was effective or beneficial during the ongoing crisis? Like, did you see any benefits? Because I think sometimes when people say sympathy, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Being sympathetic to someone's particular situation isn't necessarily a bad thing. But in this case, was it effective? Was it beneficial?
No, it wasn't, right? Because ultimately what was happening was we still had a business to run. We still have to achieve our goals and outcomes so that all of us may be in this together and, secure our future. But because we were stuck in a place of sympathy and we were paralyzed, we couldn't really help our teams come out of that situation. Look, what they went through is really hard. That's something I wish I don't have to have anybody go through. But the fact is that they went through it. And ultimately, we weren't helping them. All we were doing was saying, I understand your how you felt. We understand how you feel. So I'll see you later. Sorry about it. But that's it. So what we were doing essentially was we were sympathizing with them and we're leaving them in that place. We weren't helping them come out of the situation they were in, the feelings that they had gone through. We weren't having conversations with them to help get them out of that feeling and out of that stage that they may have experienced and bring them to the more positive side and help them become productive again and help them get over those feelings and help them see the positive side of what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to do.
Got it. So sympathetic leadership from your perspective is, and what I'm hearing is, you understand, but let people live in their excuses or their outs or their frustrations. You let them be without actually helping them.
Agreed.
Or leading.
It's like if you come to me and say, hey, Frank, hey, Mo, I can be called Frank sometimes.
It's all good. We get,
Yeah. Hey, Mo, I go to the gym every day and no matter what I do, I'm not seeing any gains. I'm not putting on any muscle. I'm not, having any success. And I listen to you. I understand what you're going through. And I'm like, yeah, sorry you hear that, Frank. That must suck.
Yeah, that totally sucks.
Yeah. It sucks that you're in that situation. Wish you luck. See you later, by the way. Bye. And what happened there is Frank is now feeling even worse. It's like, oh, Muhammad agrees with me that what I'm doing isn't working, and he confirmed that what I was feeling was validated, but he just left me, and so I'm still in this place. I haven't got out of those feelings.
Right.
Versus what I should be doing as an empathetic friend to you is be like, Frank, I understand. I know it's hard. I understand that working out is not easy, and you want to be able to see immediate gains. You want to see your muscles and you want to get better. But I want to tell you, it takes time. Be patient. Here's what I have done in my workout routine to make sure that I am able to overcome those feelings, because I've been there. I've seen it.
Right.
And here are some tips and ideas. Have you tried to work out in the mornings instead of evenings? Have you tried to look at your diet? What have you done about your diet? And what kind of workouts are you doing? And go into that conversation where I'm not just letting you feel the way you're feeling. I'm actually trying to pull you out of those feelings and giving you a path forward where you can end up, number one, getting out of the way you're feeling down. I'm getting you out of that feeling and giving you solutions to get to a better place and see the results you want to see. So that's the difference between, now we're going to introduce it, sympathy versus empathy. Right. So an empathetic leader tries to put myself in your shoes and understand your situation, even if I've not gone through it or have gone through it. But my job isn't just to leave you there and excuse you from working harder on your workouts. I'm not going to excuse you from saying, yeah, you're right, it doesn't work, so stop working out. My job is to show you how you should continue to work out, how you should exercise, how you should work towards overcoming those obstacles you're facing, and remove those obstacles and remove those impediments from your plate.
Yeah, and I feel like, in kind of following along with that storyline, like if I'm coming to you sharing that with you, I'm looking at you as someone who's already achieved gains. You know what I'm saying? And I'm looking at you as sort of that thought leader in the workout environment. And so I'm going, Muhammad, I'm coming to you hoping that what you give me is empathetic leadership. And what we saw happen, what I'm guilty of, what many people are guilty of, is people came to us, and what we gave them was sympathetic leadership. They were actually expecting us to bring that empathetic nature of coaching, mentoring, guiding, and helping them learn and grow. And what they received was something that was adding to frustration and anxiety.
Yes.
Right. And so that's something that I think is now there's another side of it that I want to talk about, and that's apathetic leadership. So you've got apathetic leadership, which is like, I could care less about the person. I'm in crisis mode. Therefore, it doesn't, your situation doesn't matter to me, because it's not helping us win revenue, and it's not helping us win new business, and it's not helping us move forward. And this is when someone could care less about someone's feelings. And, so you have this spectrum, right? You've got this apathetic approach to leadership, which is like, I'm in crisis mode. Therefore, sorry, I don't like, that's an excuse to me. Then you've got sympathetic leadership, which is, I actually am embarrassed or fearful of how to respond to you. Maybe it's in my own internal issues that I'm struggling with as a leader, or honestly just worried about how that comes off, of an us versus them mentality that I've built up in my mind. So that's sympathetic leadership. And then you've got empathetic leadership, which is just what you just mentioned, which is where you hear the person, you understand what they're going through, and then, like you said, you try to help them get out of it.
Yes.
And you're not trying to solve the problems for them. You're showcasing to them that they have an advocate. They have someone that will fight for them and that believes in them.
Yes, I would agree. So, apathetic is probably most common in a business place, because, if someone's bringing their personal problems or personal situation, they're like, that's your personal life. That's not my problem. Let's just talk about work. And we don't show any care or compassion, and we're getting straight to like, let's talk about work and get details done. And then the extreme opposite to that is, you hear out the person's personal situation, but you just feel sorry for them and let it be and let it go. So it's like you're sympathetically being apathetic, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's actually a word that we can trademark, or term that we can trademark. So how do I get on that? So I was going to say, I want to talk about Jeff really quickly.
Sure. Yes.
A good friend of ours. There was this convergence of kind of situations that all happened at once for him. And I wanted you to share that example because we talked about it. And I think it very much communicates the role of an empathetic leader and what we've seen as, how people responded in a sympathetic way versus how we should respond in an empathetic way. Can you kind of highlight that for us?
Yeah. So given this pandemic and the crisis, all of us are having to deal with different situations. Jeff Mao, someone we closely work with, his children couldn't go to daycare, and his wife is an essential worker at a hospital. So he's now left at home with his children and having to work remotely and manage his 2 kids plus a full-time job and having to juggle all of this. And what happened in the process is people noticed that, he had kids and he had to manage his kids and try to attend meetings. It was very difficult for him. Right. And so what our team started to do was they started to feel sorry for him. And they were like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for Jeff. He has to take care of 2 kids. And, he has to be able to come to the meetings. You know what? It's okay if Jeff is not invited to the meeting. It's okay. Don't make him mandatory. Make him optional. You know what? Let's not allocate that work to him. Let's just figure out how to do it on our own. And it came to a point where Jeff started to feel excluded, number one. Number two, we were ending up the team was ending up trying to get the work done some other way, but we weren't able to get the outcomes achieved because this was something clearly Jeff had to tackle. Jeff was the expert in this. There was no way anybody else could take it on. But instead of figuring out how to help Jeff, all we were doing was we were being sympathetic to Jeff and we just let him be. And we started to try to do things or not do things at all, not achieve the outcomes that we originally had slated for Jeff to achieve. And so that was starting to cause problems. And so what I realized that moment in time was I understand what Jeff is going through because even I have 2 kids who are out of school and having to work at home. And how distracting and how much effort it takes to take care of children. So instead of just letting it be, I decided to talk to Jeff and say, hey, Jeff, I understand the situation you're in. I understand what's going on with your kids. What can I do better to figure out a way to still get our outcomes achieved? Because you're the only one who can do this job. And I need you to do this job. But I understand if you can't do it in the work hours. Is there something else I can do to work with you? Is there a time later in the day when your kids are in bed or your wife is back home that I can set up this meeting because I really need your input. I need your feedback. And we started having those constructive conversations. And he really appreciated that. He saw that I was coming from a place of empathy. But I also was open enough to say, hey, we still got to get work done.
Yes.
So what can I do to accommodate your situation? Let's meet at 9:30 then. It actually works out well for me too. 9:30 p.m. My kids are in bed as well. Actually, it works out perfect. Let's meet at 9:30. I can work with you at 9:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. given your situation during the day. And I would help figure out how to clear my schedule to meet with him. Because at the end of the day, as a leader, when you're empathetic leadership, you're also a servant leader. And you have to put the needs of your team before yours. Right. And it comes from a place of empathy. So as I was beginning to understand Jeff's situation, I wasn't just going to feel bad for him. I was going to try to help him given his situation and come to his, help and meet with him on his his timeline, but still get work done. And guess what? We were able to achieve our outcomes and goals.
Yeah.
So I wasn't stuck in a place of sympathy. I came from a place of empathy and worked something out. And he feels good about himself. He feels valued. He feels like he has purpose. And he feels appreciative of Softway that we were able to accommodate and understand the situation, but still make sure he's valued and he's still bringing purpose to the company.
And there's a lot to unpack out of that story because in hearing that, the one piece of gold for me is you saying, what can I do to help? How can I accommodate? Right. And what ended up happening, because I remember being in the swirl of making excuses for Jeff on his behalf, Jeff doesn't want anybody to make excuses for him. He doesn't want people to say you're not capable of doing the work. And Jeff is actually awkwardly walking up to me now because I'm in the office and we're socially distanced, but he's looking at me while I'm talking about him on this webinar. Very strange, very meta. But the reality is he didn't ask for that. And I think what ends up happening is we start making excuses for people because we believe they're not capable of doing X, Y, and Z, or that we've created this storyline for them that is actually not true. And when you dig a little bit deeper and push a little bit past your fear of not wanting to come off as being harsh or, asking something like, hey, let's do the job that we were brought in to do. Once you push past that and say, what can I do to help? How can I serve in this moment? That's what people are really looking for from a leader. They're not looking for someone to make excuses for them and to tell other people to make excuses for them. They're looking for someone to step up to the plate and actually help them through that situation, even if it's being someone to listen, but listening empathetically, not sympathetically.
Exactly. So our whole organization, we had this big realization with my leadership team,
right?
That, hey, what we're practicing is sympathy. We're not practicing empathy. We need to start practicing empathy, and with compassion, we still need to be able to hold our team accountable. We still need to be able to get our team to the outcomes and results that we need to accomplish. Because if we're stuck in a place of sympathy and start feeling bad for the other person, then we're not doing them any service. We're actually not helping them at all. In fact, we might be hurting them.
Yeah. That feels like the answer to the question of how do you lead in a crisis? And it's with empathetic leadership.
Yes. But a lot of the times leaders may confuse sympathy with empathy. They might think that they're being empathetic, but really they're being sympathetic. Yes, they're used interchangeably sometimes. And it comes from the same feeling of understanding the other person's situation or putting yourself in their shoes.
Right.
But what you do after you understand them is the difference. In the sympathy approach, you understand what situation they're in. You feel what they're going through.
Yes.
But then in sympathy, you'll be like, oh man, that sucks. I'm sorry. Versus in empathy, you're like, oh, I understand what you're going through, but let me try to get you out of it. You shouldn't feel, if you're feeling down, let me try to get you out of feeling down. Not come in and say, yeah, that sucks, Frank, and make you feel even worse. It's not really helping.
That's actually a question I wanted to ask you. So what are some of those clear signs that a leader is actively practicing sympathetic leadership? And how can you shift from sympathetic to empathetic?
So the way to recognize is, for me personally, if I heard somebody's situation and they were like, I'm really having a hard time. I'm really struggling with this pandemic. I have a lot of stress. I have a lot of anxiety, and I just going through a lot. And I'm like, oh, sorry to hear that. Let me know if I can do anything to help, but I'm here for you, and just leave. Then I know I'm practicing sympathetic leadership, and I'm not even like talking to them about the work. I had a similar conversation like this just yesterday, actually. So there was one of our employees was not performing or getting results and outcomes achieved. And I decided that I wanted to try and understand what was going on. Why weren't we able to achieve these goals and missing deadlines? So upon getting on the call, fortunately enough, that person felt safe to share with me his situation, what personal problems he was going through, and how it was becoming an impediment in his ability to focus and do work. Now, in that moment in time, I could have just said, oh, that explains it. Sorry to hear that. I'll talk to you later. And like ended the conversation. Versus I decided to, first of all, be empathetic to his situation, what personal problems he is going through, because pandemic, everybody is going through a lot of issues, and I have to be compassionate and understanding of that. And I understood that. But I took it further and I said, okay, let's talk about what to do now, given the situation. Let's talk about the work that has to be done. What is the best way to get that work done, given your circumstances, given your situations? Let's figure out a path forward. Let's talk about, would this work? maybe you should seek help. I think a learning from this is, instead of waiting 3 weeks to share this, I think you should have raised your hand and said, hey, I'm actually struggling with this. Can someone help me? And we had that constructive dialogue and conversation and
Right.
coaching. And ultimately, we came to a conclusion and a path forward. We decided, hey, you know what? This is where your strengths are. This is where I think you can focus given your situation. So why don't we take this piece and assign it to someone else, and you focus on what you know you do best, and you get the work done. And he was happy with that resolution. And instead of being stuck and not being able to deliver and feeling the pressure of not being able to deliver, or letting the team down, and not having somebody to help him, guide him and coach him how to get out of that situation and how to ultimately achieve the outcome for the company's purpose, I had to have those conversations. And it wasn't an easy conversation, but
Right.
ultimately it ended with a really good outcome. And I know for a fact I felt better about the situation. I know that coworker of mine felt better about the situation, because he felt like I heard him, I understood him.
Yeah.
And I also gave him a solution, how to come out of this. And so that's kind of the difference between sympathetic leadership and empathetic leadership.
I think for me, what I've kind of defaulted to, seeing myself as a sympathetic leader or those traits, is I would just take the work immediately and say, okay, if they're not capable of completing the work, then I'm just going to do it on my own, right?
Yeah.
I'm just going to take it, maybe even not explain it, and communicate it, right? And there's Jeff, he's right behind you.
Yes, I see that.
And that, I think, is something that's a clear the best intentions of like, hey, this work still has to get done, but the individual isn't learning anything. They're not recognizing the opportunities for growth. They're not, so another situation, Mohammed, I want you to kind of like, this is now therapy. This has become therapy. So for me, I had a coworker come to me and say, I'm really struggling. I feel like I'm failing. I don't know if our company is even set up to handle this as an organization. Like, are we even going to survive? Like, they're coming at me with a lot of these questions that they're putting on themselves, right? How would you approach someone who's very like looking at all of this stuff, not knowing where Softway is going, not knowing where our company is moving? What would you expect out of an empathetic leader in that moment?
Let me start with how a sympathetic leader would handle that, and then I'll go to the empathetic
that
leader.
Sounds great, man.
So a sympathetic leader would listen to their concerns and their feelings and be like, yeah, you're right.
I agree.
I agree. This is, you're failing, or I'm sorry to hear you feel that way. And let them be. Like, basically you're saying you're feeling that way. I'm sorry, but I don't care. Or I'm sorry, and I have pity for you, but I don't have any solution for you.
Or in my case, I did those things, but I also said, I'll also share this.
Yes.
Right. Like,
add into that.
I'll take, you're just not hearing about it. I'm just kidding. But I will take how you're feeling. I'll remove your name, and I will share it with other people so they also know how you're feeling.
Yeah.
Right. And kind of creating that type of swirl that doesn't lead to proper outcomes. So like that, there's another piece of sympathetic leadership you can unpack for us.
Yeah. And you can participate in that sympathy and start feeling sorry for yourself by saying, you know what,
Absolutely.
I went through an exact same situation, and it sucks, man. So you can go down that path and just spiral into a place of, no coming back. But what an empathetic leader would do is hear those concerns, understand where they're coming from, but then show them the other side of the equation. Because usually when people come and say, hey, I'm feeling like a failure, I'm not able to get this work done, I just feel like I always fail. And when they use terms like I always fail, I'm a failure, I'm not able to get through this, our job as an empathetic leader is to say, I understand how you're feeling, but let's talk about all the times you have not failed. Let's talk about all the successes we've seen. Let's talk about what you've done well. Look at this. You just yesterday, you were able to deliver this piece of work, and that was phenomenal. So for you to say that you're always a failure or you feel like a failure, I want to show you that it's not like that. Let me get you out of those feelings first.
Mm.
So once I'm able to show them the other side of the equation and get them out of those feelings, and now they're more stable emotionally, then I would start talking about, so let's talk about this particular failure. What could you have done? What is the learning here? Right? And what is the takeaway from this? Oh, here's what I think you should do. Here's what I think the biggest learning is. It's okay. And get them to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's what I would do. I wouldn't just add into that and say, yeah, you're right, man, even I failed and I don't believe in this, and like create a more negative, toxic environment. And ultimately that can be very damaging for the culture of the company as well. So that's how I would have handled it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. My kind of in hearing that, you're helping to instill hope and more optimism, right? Like seeing this from a different perspective, seeing their place in the organization as available, and the importance of the relationship that they have with the company and with the team members, right? Like you're helping them see themselves where maybe they're not seeing themselves right now. They're not seeing the big picture. You're able to kind of restructure that mindset a little bit.
Yes.
And that to me is very impactful and very helpful. And I've personally experienced that from you many times. When I come to you with an issue or a problem, you're not one to sit there and say that, sorry, you will dig in and help me see opportunities. And it could be very small. Like even earlier today, we're having a conversation about some of the things we're doing in our organization. And one of our team members said, I did this work and nobody responded to it. Like I contacted people and no one responded, and it's a failure. Why even bring that up? And I had to pause for a moment and say, actually, it's not a failure. The fact that you did that, we have opportunities to learn. We have opportunities to grow. So this isn't a failure. This is a moment for us to look at it and say, what can we do better next time to actually achieve these outcomes? And even in that very small moment, it's helping people recognize that they are able to move themselves past where they think they are right now. And I think that, like, as leaders, we need to be seeing those moments more clearly and then taking decisive action when those moments arise. So my question to you is, how do you start to, let's talk about muscles again. How do you build the muscle of practicing empathetic leadership? What are some of those ways that people can begin to do that on a daily basis? Because leaders are going to be having engaged conversations with people all the time, whether it's through one-on-ones, in individual conversations with people, in team settings, whatever the case may be. What I'm thinking is there are lots of moments throughout the day to practice this. Mm-hmm. So what are some of those opportunities? What are some of those tips that you can share for people to be able to practice this and get better at seeing those moments and time to practice empathetic leadership?
Sure. So it's a journey, Frank, just like how, to get to a particular fitness level in work,
you have to go through it,
practice and work on it. The first, foremost, and important, and 50% of the battle is having self-awareness. Going through your own introspection and recognizing if you are being a sympathetic leader or an empathetic leader. That's 50% of the battle, is self-awareness.
That makes sense.
If leaders don't even recognize that they are being sympathetic instead of empathetic, and they feel like, oh, I have compassion, oh, I have care, and they're in this stage of like, oh, I am an empathetic leader. Who said I'm not? I care. I have compassion. Bringing yourself to that realization, having that introspective moment, and realizing that, hey, actually, I haven't been empathetic. I've been sympathetic. That's the first step. Second step is committing and deciding that I'm going to work on it. And then every opportunity that you go through the day, every interaction that you might have with your team, always reflecting on it and starting to see, hey, was I empathetic or sympathetic in that situation? And starting to practice that muscle of recognition and self-awareness. Then you'll get to a stage where you're able to catch yourself in the moment. It's not even retrospectively. Yeah. You're now actively recognizing in the moment, and you'll see yourself catching yourself and say, wait, hold on, let me try that again.
Yeah.
And then you'll get to that stage, and you keep practicing it until it becomes innate and part of your habit and part of your behavior and part of your mindset. So it's a journey. It requires practice. It requires you to, but the first step is having recognition or self-awareness. Not just being aware of what does empathy mean and sympathy mean, but being
Right.
self-aware if you are practicing empathetic leadership or sympathetic leadership, and delineating the difference between that. That would be the 50% of the battle, and then the rest of the 50% is getting on the practicing side of it.
So I'm thinking now that when we say leadership, we are not talking about leaders, like in the term of this layer of individual. When we say leadership, what we're also saying is anyone at any point in time can practice this.
Yeah.
And
It's situational leadership.
Situational leadership. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're in a crisis. The pandemic is not slowing down for us in America, and around the world as well. And what are some of the bright spots that we have seen when empathetic leadership is practiced at Softway? What are some of those, like for people that are saying, okay, we're still in a crisis mode? What are some of those things that we have seen actively work well for our organization, that a person who's in a company right now saying, how do I need to transform this, or what can I do in this moment? What are some of those bright spots that we've seen help us get through this crisis in a way that's been able to build our company?
So number one, actually, through crisis, our relationships and understanding of each other are strengthening. There are far more opportunities to practice empathy, and empathy from people's personal situations, predicaments, and because we're all going through it together.
Yeah,
it's easier to have empathy, right? Because you're not trying to think of a situation that someone's going through that you've never encountered. We're all in this together. We're feeling it at the same time. So there's this unique opportunity for all of us to build empathy for each other, and the situation is forcing that to happen. And secondly, from that, if we are able to handle it collectively as a team, it's strengthening our team. It's bringing our team closer to each other, uniting us, bringing an environment where our culture is being strengthened, right? It's not just the culture we talk about. It's a culture we're having to practice now in these crises. Yeah. And personally, for every individual, these crises are an opportunistic time for you to work on your transformation, because it's helping us become better people, better humans, better at our job, and learn new things and tackle things in a way that we've never experienced before. And that is all growth for us individually. So I know it's a pretty bad situation out there with this pandemic. I'm not trying to make light of the situation that we're going through. It's a reality. But at the same time, there is a bright side for us that we've been seeing, is that it's transforming our organization. It's really setting ourselves on a path of a better culture and having better empathy for each other, and focusing on taking on this challenge together as a team. And there's so much growth for us that's happening as a result of this.
It's awesome. Thank you. And I think that's a great place for us actually to switch over to Just Ask and see if we've gotten any questions that have come through on the Just Ask platform. And again, if you haven't asked any questions yet, you still have time, but we definitely want to see if you've got any questions that we can answer, that Mohammed, you can address as well. But while we're waiting on those questions, I did want to talk to you a little bit about one comment that you made around the culture of love, and the idea that we're not just saying that we have a culture of love and support, we're actively practicing it. And I think that is hopefully, as we continue to move forward as well for our team, talking to the people that are at Softway, hopefully that is part of our mission, and to continue to act in that way, and to build an even better culture of love. So we've got Karen Gray said, great explanation of the spectrum of leadership and what qualities are needed to support it all. So I think that's awesome. Thank you. And sympathetically empathetic is a great term. So thank you, Kumar. Yeah, agreed.
Sympathetically apathetic. Sorry.
Sympathetically apathetic is a great term. And then we had someone say, when we say, let me know what I can do to help in that non-specific way, it puts the burden on the struggling employee to figure out yet one more piece of what they're struggling with. I would absolutely agree with that. It feels very much like when someone goes through something in their own life and you say, hey, is there anything I can do to help? Fully knowing that they're already dealing with enough in their specific situation. And an example that I can think of is, Mohammed, a few weeks ago, you had, and was it a few weeks ago or like a week ago with your daughter?
Yes, that was a week and a half ago.
A week and a half ago, right? So
Yeah.
She gets injured, like an arm injury. And instead of saying like, what can I do to help? One of our team members, Chris, he's like, I'm bringing food to the hospital right now. What do you want? And he basically, it was, instead of saying, hey, how can I help you in this moment? Because you're like, I don't need someone to ask that question. I saw him lean in and say, I want to bring you food.
Yeah.
Like, let me help. What, like, do, and so it's being more attentive to the actual needs and offering those suggestions instead of asking that person who's already struggling to come up with a way for you to help.
Yeah. In fact, I got a lot of messages that day, and I appreciate all of the messages. One of them was, a lot of them were like, sorry to hear this. Sorry, it sucks. Sorry you have to go through this. And then there were another set of messages where like, so what's the doctor saying? What's the outcome of the x-rays? And when I would say, oh, it's a clean break, it's not shattered bones and stuff, they're like, see, that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. Actually, that's a bright side. Oh, you don't need a surgery. That's a great thing.
Yes.
So when I was getting those reinforcing messages of how to look for the positive, even in the dire situation, that gave me more encouragement than just somebody saying, sorry to hear that. Right. And I'm not discounting that message as well. But at the same time, I actually appreciated more of the messages that were like,
that's good news.
To look into the positive side.
Yes.
Can I bring you food? Can I help you here? And those kind of messages meant a lot more to me because it helped me get out of this feelings of fear for my daughter and the situation she was in. I was getting optimism. I was being fueled with the positive side, and I was getting encouraged.
Yes. So even in a moment like that, there is opportunity for encouragement. So I wanted to ask, here's a question that came through. How do you connect with teams to build trust and connection, especially with new members during this working scenario?
Okay. So I would say, trust is a pretty big topic, especially in the workplace. But I would have to say that you have to make time as a leader, be a servant leader, to have that phone call, have that video conference, and check in on your folks, regardless of whether they're struggling or not. Building that relationship by getting to know them, understanding their personal situation, or just checking in with them is the first step to start building that trust. And another way that I have practiced to build trust is to start with trust. Show that I already trust you. You, as a new employee, you don't give me any reason to build the trust. I'm going to start from a place of trust. And when you show those behaviors that as a leader, you're already starting from a place of trust, that in itself is very reinforcing to the new member to say, hey, if my leader or my manager is already trusting me so much without even getting to know me, that means a lot to me. Then I can in turn trust my leader or my manager back. But if you're always starting from a place of you need to earn my trust and you need to show me why I need to trust you, you're starting from a place of lack of trust. So that's a battle to like overcome. That's going to be difficult to begin with.
Agreed.
So that's what I would do.
And the part about connection really is getting to know someone, and taking that extra time to when it comes to a new team member, taking that extra time to actually engage with them, to learn who they are, the outreach and that proactive step as a leader to contact them and say, can I have a one-on-one with you? Can I get to know you a little bit more? Tell me about what you like. Tell me about your food, the food you like to eat. I mean, What do you like to watch on anything that helps people build more connection ultimately helps people build more trust. And so the leadership, like you said, Mohammed, starting from that place of trust, like what I like to look at is the 100 emoji. Like I got 100% trust. The only time that that's going to reduce is when you break it, right? But it's like I'm starting at 100%, and instead of 0%, and you have to earn that trust. But the other opportunity here is the connection piece, which is getting to know people and proactively engaging with people, not just in work environments. Taking that extra effort to get to know people and build those connections. I mean, if you think about it, if you start a new relationship with a new coworker during these remote working scenarios and you build a significant amount of trust and connection, that's going to be amplified when you can work together again.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And in a remote environment, it is difficult as it is to get to know people and build relationships.
Absolutely.
But this unique circumstance and situation, if you can be vulnerable about it and share your feelings and what you're going through as a result of these crises, that could be way more powerful in building trust with your new team members. As a leader, if you can be vulnerable and share your struggles first and talk about, here's where I am failing, here's what I am struggling with, and show that you're human and you're going through the same problems that everybody else is, that can help increase that level of trust a lot faster.
That makes sense.
So I would say the leader would have to also start being vulnerable and sharing things with their team that gives their team that level of trust to you as a leader or a coworker.
Agreed. So can you give us I'd say you gave us a pretty good example earlier, but can you give us another example of a recent success when practicing an empathetic approach with an individual?
I have a few.
All right. Like he's a mental Rolodex. Which one do I?
I'd rather you give me a scenario, Frank. I do better. Like if you can give me a scenario or an example that I can show you how to be an empathetic leader.
Sure. So when someone gives you as a leader critical feedback, someone says, I don't appreciate the way that you spoke, or I don't appreciate the way that you gave feedback. How can you as a leader not sympathize with that individual, but help them engage?
First of all, I don't even know that I go to a place of sympathy for critical feedback as a leader in a normal situation.
That's fair.
And I think this is real for all leaders. When receiving feedback, it is always difficult, right? So number one, I have to have a growth mindset as a leader, to where if one of my team member comes to me and gives me feedback, I have to be able to take that feedback, no matter how critical it is, no matter how negative it is. I have to be able to practice a growth mindset and not get defensive and try to defend my situation in the moment, but rather try to seek clarity in what that feedback is. If that feedback is filled with emotions and feelings that the person is giving about you or how they're feeling, then you need to first practice a place of empathy and understand, why is this person feeling so strongly about this? Try to understand where they're coming from. Don't take it as a personal attack. Don't take it as an accusation. Take it as, this is how they're feeling, and that is a matter of fact. The way they're feeling, I cannot dispute that. I cannot argue that. How people feel is how they feel.
Right.
And so if I can rationalize that, my first step would be to now take that emotions out of the equation and really look for what it is that the person is intending to give me, the gift of feedback, and try to seek clarity and understand. And I would be like, Frank, I hear that you are pretty upset with what happened yesterday with me. In order for me to clearly understand what you're saying, can we talk about what just happened? What was it yesterday that, like, walk me through the chain of events so I can understand where you're coming from. And seek clarity and try to get that feedback from that person or coworker, and look for the feedback. And then if indeed it's something that it makes logical sense for the feelings they're having, then apologize.
Right.
And then look for a resolution and say, okay, I hear you. I apologize. Frank, can you tell me, how would you like me to handle that situation next time? this is what I'm taking away from this. Maybe next time I should speak to you this way, or
Yes.
maybe next time I should have had a one-on-one with you instead of doing it in a public setting.
Right.
And now I know that. Is that okay? Is that a better resolution? Can we establish a working agreement that from here on out, if I want to say something to you, I'll take you on the side and speak to you. That's how you'd like to receive it. So coming from a place of empathy, understanding the situation, unpacking, taking out the emotions from it and looking for the gift of feedback, and then coming with an action plan, how you're going to deal with it in the future, is how I would handle it as an empathetic leader.
Yeah, that was a great answer. I mean, that was like fantastic. So there was like inception level layers of empathy kind of wrapped in all of it. But like the takeaway for me is that even though you had to empathize with their situation, but once you came to an understanding of where they were, you didn't just let it sit. You actually helped build a resolution that was action oriented. Right. Yes. And I think that's really the key here is whenever you're trying to lead through a crisis, your empathetic leadership needs to be action oriented to help the individual and to connect together. Right. And so just like the story you shared earlier in our conversation about the conversation you had yesterday with that individual, that, hey, it was a critical conversation. It was a discussion that needed to happen, and you were able to resolve it and move forward knowing the situation that they were in. And that to me is my biggest takeaway from this discussion, is that an empathetic leader is one that's building action out of the situation they have a better understanding of.
Yes, totally.
And so that makes perfect sense to me. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. These were great questions, by the way, and a great conversation point. So Mohammed, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this. I think it is extremely illuminating to actually break the differences out a little bit and focus our energy on understanding sympathetic versus empathetic leadership, because there's a misnomer that says, okay, you need to be as sympathetic as you can be, and that is real care, right? Mm-hmm. But what you're saying is that compassion actually takes precedence when you're being empathetic for someone versus just sympathizing with their situation. And yes, what people are coming to us for, people are coming to a leader for, is for guidance, for support, and for help. They're not coming so that we'll just sit there and say, I don't know how to help you in this moment. So this really does bring us back to a culture of love. If you have care for one another and you truly love the people that you're engaging with, then you will step up to that plate, which is a potentially challenging, maybe an awkward conversation, one that pushes you outside of your comfort zone. But that truly shows the people around you that you care for them, that you're willing to go the extra step and the extra mile. And that, I think, really encapsulates what we're trying to accomplish at Softway, and hopefully that helps paint a clearer picture of what you can do as an individual, as a leader in times of crisis. So the last thing I want to say is that we actually are going to be sending you a link inside of an email to download this topic as an ebook. So we've crafted an ebook that goes through a lot of these discussion points around the differences between sympathetic and empathetic leadership, so that you can actually start to, have something to utilize as a toolbook. There are tips, there are resources, there's content there that you can engage with if you're like, hey, this is a great conversation, what do I do next? So we're going to do that. We're also going to be sharing in that email a link to our new podcast, which is called Love as a Business Strategy. So the actual podcast breaks down different components of business and how love plays a part in each of those components. So we challenge ourselves each week to find something that we can engage with and say, does love have a role to play there? And we've already talked about topics around digital transformation. We've had topics around diversity and inclusion. And the next topic that we will have in our podcast will be around empathetic leadership. So if you want to dive even further, you can engage, subscribe, listen to the podcast on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. And then lastly, I want to talk about what we discussed earlier around Seneca Leaders. So Seneca Leaders is a leadership event that helps to foster culture change. It's like a catalyst for culture change that's designed specifically for leaders. So this is available virtually or in person. And when I say virtually, I mean like literally this type of conversation, this type of environment where we're in a remote workforce. But when it comes back to people being able to get back together in person, Seneca Leaders will also be available in that situation as well. So we're going to be sharing all of those details in an email to make sure that you are staying connected with some of the things, the resources, the tools, and a type of product that we already have that can help leadership teams in this moment recognize opportunities to improve and to build even better culture.
Yep. I would also say if you want to use the ebook and give it to someone as a gift to show them how to be an empathetic leader, that might be a good trick to give to your boss or your manager or your coworker if you want to see them practice more empathy.
Absolutely. So Mohammed, I want to again say thank you so much for the time. And I think this is about it. Actually, we've got one more question. Do you think we can cover this? Is the event still going? Can we do that real quick?
Go for it.
Because this is a great question. We're gonna break the book a little bit. So we've already closed it, but here I'm gonna reopen it. So we had another question that says, any examples of how you have applied empathetic leadership in the context of a client situation, which can be quite different from a colleague or employee situation? Let's try to nail this in a couple minutes to give people that time back that may have to step out. But I think this is a great question.
Yeah. So I think it's extremely important that we practice empathetic leadership with everyone. Yeah. Everyone around us, whether they're your family, coworkers, or customers, or clients. It can be very powerful because remember, leadership is about situational leadership. So if your customers are having certain situation, I've had a situation where one of my customers' boss came and put down on them an incredibly impossible deadline to deliver something. And my customer was in a bind, and they came to me and said, look, Mohammed, they've moved up the deadline. We need to deliver this 2 weeks ahead of schedule, not 2 weeks as it was originally planned. It's 2 weeks ahead of the original plan. And I'm in really deep need for help. And, in that moment, I could have said, I don't care. Our contract is our contract. We're going to deliver it in the timeline I said. That's your problem. Go handle your situation with the leader, with your boss. Or I could have said, oh man, I'm really sorry to hear you're in that situation. Bosses can be really difficult sometimes, can't they? And just walk away and be like, still stick to the original deadline. But instead, I've had to try and truly understand the predicament they're in. And I didn't just walk away. I actually said, let's try to understand, why is your boss asking you to move up this deadline? And I also didn't just accept the deadline. I told my customer, hey, let's talk about what can we do to go back and convince your boss why they need to wait an additional 2 weeks. Here, let's try to understand what is driving his or her decision to move it up 2 weeks ahead of time. Right. Let's try to understand what they're trying to solve and maybe come up with an alternative solution. Maybe do a phased release. Maybe we'll just release a prototype or an MVP, and then 2 weeks later come back and do the polished release. Would he be happy with that? Would that be a good solution? So instead of just, letting my customer deal with their own boss and that environment, I actually began to understand their predicament, understand what even their boss is trying to do from a place of empathy, and try to come up with a resolution and a path forward so that there's a win-win-win for everyone. So that's an example. That's
a great example. And I appreciate you taking the extra time to do that, because I saw that come through and I thought, you know what, this is good. This is a great question to ask, because we've been talking from interpersonal colleague to colleague, but what happens in the context of a client situation? And it's kind of the same, because like you said, we all can practice situational leadership, whether it's with our father-in-law or a colleague or a client. So thank you all very much for attending. Mohammed, thank you again for staying on a little extra. And for those of you that are watching right now, take a look in your inbox. It may land somewhere in your inbox with this additional information that you can use. Hopefully you found value in this. We really appreciate your time. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.